The ceasefire that never existed. Why the world remains silent while the genocide in Gaza continues. More than a year after the beginning of the Gaza offensive, the world continues to witness the systematic destruction of an entire population under the full visibility of international institutions, international law, and global media. Despite public statements about humanitarian pauses and ceasefires, Israel has continued active military operations, aerial bombardments, artillery strikes, targeted assassinations, and blockades of food and humanitarian aid. Governments publicly express concern, but none have taken the steps mandated by international law to prevent genocide. The United States continues military funding. The European Union issues political statements but avoids sanctions. The United Arab Emirates and other regional governments maintain or even expand their normalization agreements with Israel. Instead of decreasing, the level of destruction has expanded into southern and central Gaza, including areas Israel previously declared safe zones. The result is the same: mass civilian death and the deliberate dismantling of the infrastructure necessary for life. The myth of ceasefire, how international law was ignored in real time. Multiple ceasefires were declared publicly by Israeli officials and promoted by Western governments. Yet according to UN OCHA, UNRWA, MSF and independent journalists, military operations continued within hours, and in some cases minutes, of these announcements. Documented violations include airstrikes in residential districts of Khan Yunis and Rafah during the November pause, targeted attacks on hospitals including Al-Shifa, Nasser and Al-Maltank, shelling around designated safe zones, killing of civilians attempting to access humanitarian aid trucks. The pattern shows a strategic use of the term ceasefire, not as a cessation of violence, but as a diplomatic shield. A ceasefire that is violated repeatedly becomes a propaganda tool, not a humanitarian measure. Yet Washington, Brussels and Abu Dhabi continued using official language of de-escalation, despite real-time evidence from the ground. In legal terms, a false ceasefire is not a delay in conflict. It is a continuation of war under political protection. The human cost, civilian deaths in numbers no government can ignore. According to verified UN and international human rights organizations, over 40,000 Palestinians killed, more than 70% are women and children, over 17,000 children killed or missing, nearly 2 million civilians displaced, over 80% of homes damaged or destroyed, all major hospitals in Gaza rendered non-operational. UN declares famine in northern Gaza. These numbers come from United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, World Health Organization, UNIEF, UNRWA, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, International Committee of the Red Cross. Contrary to political claims, Israeli government officials themselves have repeatedly stated that Gaza's health ministry casualty reports are reliable and historically accurate. This has been noted publicly in prior conflicts. Therefore, the data the world is ignoring comes from sources the world itself has previously accepted. What international law says: a textbook case of genocide. The 1948 Genocide Convention. A state commits genocide if it intends to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's destruction, imposing measures intended to prevent births, forcibly transferring children. In Gaza, at least 4 of these conditions apply. Systematic killing of civilians, deliberate destruction of infrastructure necessary for survival, blockade of food, medicine, water, fuel, forced displacement of the entire population, public statements by Israeli officials calling for the destruction or expulsion of Palestinians. The International Court of Justice, ICJ. In January 2024, the ICJ ruled, there is a plausible risk of genocide. Israel must prevent genocidal acts. Israel must allow humanitarian aid. Israel must preserve evidence of war crimes. Israel did not comply. Legally, that places responsibility not only on Israel, but on nations providing military and political backing. Why the United States is silent and complicit. The United States is the largest military, financial, and diplomatic supporter of Israel. Documented facts: $3.8 billion in annual military aid, shipment of bombs, artillery shells, JDAM kits, aircraft parts, multiple vetoes of UN Security Council calls for ceasefire, diplomatic protection blocking international investigations. When a country provides weapons used during alleged genocide and prevents accountability mechanisms, it becomes legally exposed to complicity in genocide, according to Articles I and III of the 1948 Genocide Convention. Washington claims to promote rules-based order. But in Gaza, rules were suspended. The order disappeared. Weapons continued to flow. U.S. silence is not neutrality, it is participation. Why the European Union is silent. The politics of hypocrisy. European governments have condemned genocide in other regions. Rwanda, Darfur, Bosnia, Ukraine. Sanctions were imposed, trade was halted, international courts were mobilized. In Gaza. No arms embargo, no sanctions, no freeze of economic cooperation, no recognition of ICC jurisdiction over Israeli officials. The EU claims moral authority, but applies human rights selectively. European companies continue technology cooperation with Israel, especially in cybersecurity, military systems, surveillance, and energy. The silence is not diplomatic caution, it is political calculation. Why the United Arab Emirates is silent? Economic and strategic interest. The Abraham Accords transformed Israel from a political enemy into a business partner. Since 2020, economic deals between Israel and the UAE include investments in ports, gas and shipping technology and cybersecurity cooperation, intelligence sharing, military and surveillance systems. After normalization. No major diplomatic pressure on Israel, no suspension of cooperation, no threat of economic consequences, no break in relations. The UAE's silence is a strategic decision. Economic growth over humanitarian responsibility. Palestine became a diplomatic inconvenience. This is the definition of complicity by silence. Media censorship and information control. Western news networks have underreported civilian casualties, used passive voice to hide responsibility, buildings collapsed instead of airstrikes, destroyed buildings, cut off Palestinian reporters live on air, removed video evidence from social networks, repeated unverified Israeli military claims as fact, ignored UN, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch documentation. When journalists cannot report freely, the public cannot understand the crime. Silence is manufactured. Human rights organizations agree. War crimes and crimes against humanity. Amnesty International concluded Israel committed crimes against humanity. Human Rights Watch documented starvation as a weapon of war. Doctors Without Borders documented attacks on medical staff. Oxfam confirmed Israel blocked humanitarian aid. UN special rapporteurs accused Israel of genocide under international law. Not one of these organizations used political language. All used legal definitions. What should have happened? Legal obligations of the international community. Under the Genocide Convention, every country is obligated to prevent genocide. No state may assist a state committing genocide. States providing weapons during genocide share responsibility. Silence itself is a violation of international law. Therefore, the U.S. is in breach of the Genocide Convention. The EU is in breach. The UAE, through cooperation and normalization, is complicit. Israel has not been punished because it is protected militarily by the U.S. It is protected politically in the unit, is integrated economically with the EU. It is normalized by Arab governments. No leader faces consequences. A state that kills civilians without consequences will continue killing civilians. The future. ICC, UN and universal jurisdiction. Even if the war ends today, accountability can proceed. International Criminal Court, mandatory investigation of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, arrest warrants for political and military officials. UN General Assembly, suspension of Israel from international forums. International Tribunal, universal jurisdiction. Any country may arrest and prosecute individuals responsible for war crimes. Arms embargo, mandatory under international law once genocide risk is confirmed. This process may take years, but it is legally unavoidable. The world is not silent by accident. It is silent by choice. Gaza is not a tragedy. Gaza is a crime. The ceasefire was never real. The genocide never stopped. And the silence of world powers is not ignorance, it is strategy. The US protects and funds the war. The EU hides behind diplomatic language. The UAE continues normalization and economic partnership. Israel acts with no fear of consequence. History will not ask what speeches were made. History will ask, why were women and children starved while the world watched? Why were hospitals destroyed with no sanctions? Why did governments speak of human rights and do nothing? The genocide in Gaza continues because the world allows it.